welcome you all tonight, and we hope that we're going to have a very pleasant evening, but most importantly, to have a good time and probably reflect deeper about, Africa Day and Africa Month. And for me personally, Africa Month means a lot of things. I've been blessed with the ability to have been able, thank you, sir, that I've managed to travel in a number of African countries. And I'm also blessed to speak a number of African languages. And it's always very interesting for me in South Africa when people see other fellow Africans as foreigners, you know? So it's very, very close to my heart, everything that we do on Africa Day and Africa Month. Most importantly, being in this part of the world in KZN, we find a lot of Zulus within the continent itself, and some of them still speak Zulu. You know, in Malawi, in Kenya, in Congo, you find Batas in the DRC, you know. So it's quite interesting. So I think we'll just start with the program right away. We're gonna start with the singing of the African Union anthem, and then come with the South African anthem. But before we do that, I'm gonna ask you to switch your phones, put them on silent or switch them off. And then the bathrooms, if you go down that way, they're across the hall. So it's always very important to start with that. And I would like to find out who's gonna assist us with starting the African Union song. May you please rise.
Let
Oh, please. As you said, I'd like to welcome Dr. Gcina Mhlophe. I got confused. I thought I was Gcina Mhlophe. Please welcome. Thank you. This is Gcina. No problem.
Sanibonani ekhaya, sanibonani ninjani? Ngicabanga ukuthi sisekaZulu Natal ne? Angakacross kakhulu ama-borders. We're still in KZN. And thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor to be at an event of this nature, especially when we are celebrating this beautiful African continent of ours, and we shall continue honoring one another and honoring those who came before us. Ingqalabutho ezasibeka la sikhona namhlanje, uma singakwenzanga lokho kuba senza iphutha elikhulu. So ngiyathokoza kakhulu ukuthi sihlangane lana namhlanje. Ngizocela nje ukubiza uVC ozoba nathi njengamanje to address us, and then we'll take it from there. Ngiyabonga kakhulu. Yebo. Unyuvesi lena yasezulu.
Members of Council, University of Zululand Council Online, representative of the Ministry and the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, members of executive from the University of Zululand, deans of our faculties, members of staff present, Professor Pra, our key note speaker for this evening, Dr. Gcina. Africa Day is one of the most significant days in the history of the people of Africa. It is a day that is celebrated every year on the 25th of May to commemorate the founding of the Organization of African Unity, now known as African Union, an organization that was founded on the 25th May 1963 by founding fathers of an independent Africa, with a view of getting rid of the vestiges of colonialism and apartheid, as well as fostering the much needed unity among the peoples of Africa. In other words, Africa Day is a day that will remember our history and identity as Africans, taking stock of where we come from and where we are headed as people of Africa in terms of progress we have made socially, politically, and economically. It is a day where we remember our common bond as a people of our shared history that makes us a people with common destiny as a result of our shared experience, especially that colonial domination by external forces. When the founding fathers conceived the Organization of African Unity in 1963, they made it clear that theirs was a pan-African vision of Africa that was united, free, and in control of its own destiny, hence their emphasis on sovereignty and territorial integrity of each of the African states. They were quite aware that the decolonial agenda of a free, prosperous Africa is incomplete without a unity and solidarity that transcends narrow ethnic, gender, national, and class-based solidarities that divide, that unite all the peoples of Africa. This remains the vision of the African Union that was officially launched then in July of 2002 in Durban, although with the emphasis of increased cooperation and integration of African states for the purposes of driving economic growth and development. That is why in 2013, the African Union came up with the Agenda 2063 as a blueprint that envisions a 50-year African development trajectory. Having highlighted this brief history behind the idea of Africa Day, what is important today is that we celebrate this day under the conditions that are different from when the idea was mooted. The rest of the continent is relatively free from the shackles of colonialism. I use the phrase relatively free as a way of indicating that more needs to be done on the social, cultural, and economic front. It is this unfinished business that we commit ourselves to addressing. Our founding president, Rolihlahla Mandela, pointed out that this challenge during his reflective moments. Mandela noted, I quote, "I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried to falter. I've made missteps along the way. But I've discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb," close quote. Indeed, as we move forward, we realize that there are many more hills to climb. The seeming permanence of the hills to climb point out the fact that the colonialism was a total in its reach. It left no space that colonists did not contend or undermine. In this regard, we wake this moment to do exactly what advised when he said, I quote, "I have taken a moment here to rest, to still a view that glorious vista that surrounds me, to look back on the distance I have come. But I only rest for a moment, for with freedom comes responsibilities, and I dare not linger, for my long walk is not ended," close quote. Despite the portrayal of hopelessness, Africa remains a continent that is rich in tangible and intangible cultural heritage. This is the heritage whose laboratory potential needs to be exploited for the service of its people. What defines us as Africans is not just our common historical experience, but our rich, diverse cultures, especially our artistic creativity that makes us versatile agents of our own history rather than passive recipients of foreign cultures. Thus, even though we have colonial history of being dominated by foreign cultures from Europe and elsewhere, the peoples of Africa have managed to contest, resist, and blend their traditional cultures than get completely swallowed by these foreign cultures. In spite of our rich cultural milieu, the symbolic significance of Africa Day lies in reminding us that our diversity in cultures do not automatically translate into our disunity, but in fact, the day is a reminder that we are one as Africans. Our oneness as Africans is enhanced when we resist the colonial ordering of our cultural identities into those that are superior and those that are inferior, instead of horizontal comradeship amongst ourselves as culture-producing people. Today, we are witnessing a horizontal relationship in our diverse cultures exhibitions, a development that dignifies the aspirations of our founding fathers of independent Africa dream that we all aspire to experience in our lifetime. For this part, the university has decided not to talk the talk, but to walk the path. Consistent with this vision, we are redefining ourselves as the University of Zululand, not as a university that is restructured for relevance, but we have decided to state unapologetically that we want to be known as a distinct African university. In so doing, we want to separate ourselves from separately an institution that is located in the continent while its intellectual and scholastic gaze is elsewhere. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Africa Day Commemoration Lecture held in partnership with the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. I want to thank you all.
Siyabonga kakhulu enkosi, and the mother of the house has spoken. And this is a Prof. Xoliswa Mtose, Vice Chancellor, and the Principal of the University of Zululand. Siyathokoza, siyabonga, siyabulela, tenkosi, sibamba ngasibini. And when we are being welcomed in this manner and we are looking at where we are going as not only the African continent, but the people of this universe, we are part and parcel of the greater world out there. And educational institutions like these, they matter big time because they bring us together. They let us look into a future that we are striving for. There is a book that I've enjoyed over the years, and I find myself returning to this page. I'm going to share this with you. And this is edited by the one and only Ubaba U Desmond Tutu. The right hand of God. The right hand of God is writing in our land, writing with power and with love. Our conflicts and our fears, our triumphs and our tears are recorded by the right hand of God. The right hand of God is pointing in our land, pointing the way we must go. So clouded is the way. So easily we stray, but we are guided by the right hand of God. The right hand of God is striking in our land, striking out at envy, jealousy, hate and greed, our selfishness, lust, our pride and deeds unjust are destroyed by the right hand of God. The right hand of God is lifting in our land, lifting the fallen one by one. Each one of us are known by name and rescued one by one by the lifting hand, the right hand of God. The right hand of God is healing in our land, healing the broken bodies, minds, and souls. So wondrous is its touch with love, love that means so much when we are healed by the right hand of God. The right hand of God is planting in our land, planting seeds of freedom, fearlessness, hope, and love. Let us, we, the people of Africa, be one and be guided by the right hand of God. It's one of my favorite writings in this book. It's called the African Prayer Book. Ngizobiza manje our keynote speaker. I'd like to call upon Professor Kwesi Pra, sociology professor and founder and director of the Center for Advanced Studies of African Society. Sir, siyathokoza kakhulu banani. Asishayeni izandla simamukele ngokusemthethweni. uCovid akalithathanga ihlombe lethu. Yebo, we still have the spirit. Amakwande.
Vice Chancellor, DVC, Ginga Kope, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored, asked to offer a lecture in celebration of the Africa Month. In celebration of the Africa Month, I elected to pivot my address around two central points. 2 points which are interrelated, closely interrelated, in fact, points that cannot be pulled apart. That is the axis between language and culture. And locate this in the broad sweep of history of our people, and see where we are headed. Knowing where we're coming from. Now, years ago, many years ago, over 50 years ago, my teacher, it happened to be a Dutchman who had grown up during the period of the Russian Revolution in Russia. And but they were Dutch, wealthy Dutch people who were in Russia and working for banks. And he says to me that after the revolution, when the revolution took place in Russia, some of his family friends of his father and mother, were saying that no, this is just chaos created by a rabble. It will end soon. It's got no consequence. Don't you see the sort of people who are behind it and in front of it? People like Lenin and Trotsky, they are ruffians and criminals. It's not going to get anywhere. But it got Russia somewhere. Remember Russia abolished serfdom only in 1861 by Tsar Alexander II. Previously, for hundreds of years, the people were semi-slaves. This was 4 years before the abolition of, that was 1865 in the case of America. Now, the point he was making was that he ended up in Holland and then went to the colony, Indonesia, where he was a judge and also a professor of law. The judge and a professor of law. In 1941, the Japanese overran the whole of Southeast Asia. And Indonesia was overrun by the Japanese and threw all the Dutch people in camps, internment camps. After the war, 4 years later, the Japanese wanted to come back as the colonial power. The Dutch wanted to come back as the colonial power. My teacher said he was one of the leading Dutch academics who stood up and said no, for which he was branded a traitor. But it led him to understand that the progress of humanity as a whole, all of us, can never be completely stopped. That we're moving forward steadily. It may be halted from time to time, arrested from time to time, but it can never be permanently halted. In other words, it is not unilinear, it is discontinuous, but the trajectory is in a certain direction of greater freedom, greater emancipation for human beings as a whole. And emancipation, I mean freedom from the conditions of nature, but also freedom, enlarged freedom from the conditions imposed by human groups on others. Now, Africa, or us, we have the tendency often to celebrate the continent. But we should be celebrating the people. I find myself at odds with people often when they talk about the African continent and we're liberating the African continent. You don't even liberate geography, for heaven's sake. You don't liberate a chunk of earth. You liberate people. It is the progress of the people, the African people, that we try to. There is a sphere which can be analyzed why we do that, why we are unable to say African people, why we shy away from the idea of progress for African people. Because progress for Chinese people, progress for Indian people, progress for Arab peoples, it's legitimate aspiration. So please, that's the first thing I would want you to pay attention to. Number two, with respect to that, African people, some people equate automatically with blackness. There is a confusion about that. You know, blackness is inert, it's biological. It doesn't breathe. It doesn't have ideas. Blackness doesn't create culture. It is people who create culture. And culture makes people. It's a dialectical relationship. We continuously create culture. And the culture continuously defines us. We happen, for most, to be black. But not all black people are necessarily Africans. There are black people in other parts of the world who are not Africans. Also, for example, the Jewish people have ranged from blonde to black. Arab peoples range from blonde to black. Nobody calls himself in the world, we the yellow people. No. The idea of the yellow people was foisted on Easterners by Westerners, by trying to racialize them. The same way that blackness was foisted on us to racialize us. So these are ideas which we must be very careful about. Now, the emancipation of Africans has proceeded uninterruptedly like other people. I give the example of women, for example, in the West. The first woman who received the power to vote was in the 1920s. In Ireland, until the 60s, the Catholics were fighting and protesting and marching on the streets for their civil rights. It's not finished yet. In the United States, which they call the leading democratic society in the world, we know that until now, in fact, until this week, they are still trying to institute laws to suppress voting rights, the vote of people. Now, I'm making this point to say that, in fact, even democracy, and the idea of democracy, goes on in a trajectory, is interrupted, it's never complete. So emancipation, the freedom of Africans, is never a completed agenda. In fact, our independence, which came only 3/4 of a century after the partition, remember the partition was 1885. By 1960, there were only a handful, barely a handful, of African states which were independent. From 1960 to 1970, 2/3 of Africa became independent states. And we were happy with our freedom, but it was an uncompleted journey. It was just a neo-colonial arrangement. It meant improvement from the condition we were in previously, but it was not the end of the journey. In fact, in many ways, it was the beginning of the journey, because the journey had started first with the usurpation of African culture. That's colonialism. The suppression of the supremacy of our languages, the imposition of another language. It came with introduction, quickly, of religious practices, rituals of the colonizers, and the condemnation and the heathenization of our cultural practices as pagan, barbaric, etc. And we internalized, we came to believe some of these stories, these mythologies. We believed that we were pagan. And the first Africans who were drawn into the processes of colonialism were those who had accepted these mythologies of colonialism. They were used then to help to destroy our cultures. This is how it started. Now, by the time 75 years later that we came out, we started coming out of this colonial arrangement, 75 years later, in fact, they had created a group, a minority of us, who were to high degrees assimilated to the cultures of the Westerner, and who, in other words, were in situ, in place of the colonizers, operating the system which had been created by colonialism. These were people with the same color of skin, from the same villages, spoke the same languages, ate the same food, but who were, to various degrees, completely assimilated to the cultures of our former masters. Now, a good part of the population saw them as part of us, but in fact, in terms of cultural agency, they were more part of the colonial order and the powers outside than us, than the majority of the people in our societies. Colonialism, therefore, very importantly, truncated our existence and gave us the feeling that our cultures were insubstantial, incapable of modernity, should be kicked and destroyed. And they gave us the belief that our culture, when you talk about culture in Africa, most of the time, people are thinking in terms of exotic dances, atavistic practices, you know, ideas and social items which belong more to the museum than to current everyday life. They think of it in terms of, oh, this is traditional African culture, that is circumcision, botched circumcisions. Every year you read about that in the Transkei, in the Eastern Cape, that people are being killed, youngsters, and they're getting sick and so on because of circumcision. And polygyny, you know, that is marrying a string of ladies. Now, last week somebody was suggesting that we should have now polyandry. That's the opposite of polygyny. But both are types of polygamous arrangements where one lady can have 3, 4, 5 husbands as she or she pleases. And you see, all the backward ideas, you know, unhelpful ideas, are put into this rubric of African culture. You know, everything which is negative is levirate. That is marrying the wife of your brother when you die, or your brother marrying your ex-wife, or something. You know, that sort of thing. That is African culture. That is tradition. That is, and dancing and that sort of thing. Now, unfortunately, culture does not mean this. This is also part of culture. It's a small part of culture. Culture in a scientific sense is a much larger thing. Culture in a scientific sense is everything that human beings have created through either extraction from nature or modification of nature or deliberate manufacture, which enables humans to exist as communities. That is it. Now, it has two sides. It has a material manifestation. So in other words, this is part of culture. This is part of culture. The clothes I wear are part of culture. The shoe, the drink, everything that we create to enable our existence is part of culture. And culture is dynamic. It's changing all the time. It is never sealed. It is never completely sealed off one from the other. It interpenetrates other cultures. It mixes. But cultures which are free and strong and robust and resilient are those cultures which are able to absorb influences without losing their basic character. Cultures which are conquered means that slowly the people who are conquered become other people. If you lose your language, you lose your ritual practices, you lose your religion, you lose your customs and your beliefs, then You don't die physically. The culture doesn't die necessarily physically. You become somebody else. You may be black, but you become part of a culture which you are assimilated to. This is the problem which, for example, the African Americans are largely facing. This is the problem which the Irish have faced from the English. People forget that the Irish were colonized by the English brutally, murderously. For 800 years, they were the first colony of the English. You see, they did the same. They destroyed the language, literally. The language was resuscitated only in 1917. It was only left in villages in Ireland. People forget that. It is one white group which colonized another white group. And in the north of the country, they imported Presbyterians from Scotland and Protestants from England to dominate the Irish Catholics, who were the lower classes. They did the same thing with the Welsh. The Welsh people lost their language, literally. So language, therefore, is key. Wherever you see that a certain people are losing their language, then they are on the way to perdition. Then they are being destroyed. And you see also that they are taking other people's language. Then watch the people whose language they are taking are their masters. That's what it is. They conquered huge parts of the world. They took the whole of North Africa. They took Persia. They conquered the Ottomans, the Turks, the Seljuk Turks. They conquered them. And they planted their religion on them and their language. The Persians were the first to be able to overthrow Arabic culture back. You know, the Persians, the Iranians, and that's the fact that they were the first to be able to do it and went back to their old language, their old writing system. It gave them confidence. That is why they're suddenly emerging as a power now. They modernized their languages and they emerged as a power. In fact, the influence of Islam, of the Arab world, conquered the whole of North Africa. The Africans who were there are those that have suffered most on this continent from colonialism, Arab imperialism. But the effects of Arab imperialism is more enduring on this continent than Western imperialism. People don't realize that. But the people, they Arabized the Amazigh people. The Amazigh language is an African language. But today, the people who speak these languages are small communities in Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia. And somebody like Mr. Gaddafi was proud of the fact that they've lost their language. Yes. Yes. He said, Amazigh, to speak Amazigh is like to take poison from your mother's breast. Yes, Mr. Gaddafi, that was his view. The Amazigh people are standing up now. They're fighting for their rights in Morocco, in Algeria, Libya. Now, so you see, this thing is global. It's not something to do with color as such. You know, the destruction and the imposition of on other people. It's not a question of color. It's a question of power and resources and wealth and so on. Now, I think we should look at culture properly. This is the real battleground which our children, and Hugh Masekela made a comment not too long before he died in his normal jocular way. He said, watching children and so on, he said 20 years from now, they will be saying, we were once Africans. In other words, we've ceased to be Africans. The danger is there. We will assimilate too much to be able to get back. Now, language lies at the heart of culture. Language is intangible. It's not something which is manufactured, which you can see, which you can touch, like a car or drinks or this thing or anything like that. But it is that which transacts the whole of culture. Language is the central pillar on which the whole of the edifice of culture rests. The Afrikaners proved it here. We don't have to look very far. The language which emerged, at least they they took it from the servants and the slaves and elevated it to a fuller, from the 1870s. 1913, they standardized the spelling system. Only recently, 1913, the first rules of spelling for a standardized version was done in 1913. The same year, with determination, they took it to primary schools. 5 years later, they were introducing it to universities. 1925, 27, they had it in Parliament, as you could speak. The English you were laughing about it. The Afrikaners couldn't speak 4 sentences without injecting English into it. 1933, they produced the first Bible. So in the same space of time, 20 years, that is taking us to move from the end of apartheid to the present, they created a language which you could study in, you could work in, you could create everything in. Look at us. Now, how many years after the end of apartheid? And what are we doing? What are our children doing now? I remember in the university, I went to the I don't know what you call that place, where the cars are kept and where Oki Lombard sits, and what's the name of that place? Yeah. And I was conversing with one of the gentlemen there, and he was yes, these days, when you ask a child in Zulu too, you ask him the question, and he said, what are you saying now? The child begins to talk to you in English to ask you, what are you saying in Zulu? You see. Now, it shows you the depth of our alienation. You know, it shows you the depth, And it's all over Africa like this. All over Africa. I remember somebody who you all know, I won't mention it, a very famous writer, African writer, lady from West Africa, say to me that French is an African language. She was arguing that French is an African language. You see, so when we reach that point, then we are really finished and we are lost. So please, I won't drag this thing on much longer. I want to emphasize again that the key for us is culture, particularly language. Language. I repeat again, language. Let us get hold of our languages and use the languages to lift up. If we use our languages, the common man in the village is empowered. We empower everybody that way. The moment we start, and those villages even speak the language more beautifully, they have greater control than those of us who are so-called educated. If we want to lift our society by the bootstraps, then take the language to the people. Take knowledge to the people in the languages they know. That way we will transform Africa, and the people will have their pride back. And the collective memory will come back. The enemy memory which was broken by colonialism would start reconstituting itself. In other words, we will relate back into our history through our languages. Also, the effects of these borders, which were created about 100 years ago, to divide us, and so on, will slowly lose their impact. Go to all the people in Lesotho can go to the people in Barotseland, in Zambia, can go to the Tswana and the Sotho-speaking peoples of South Africa can go to, then you have a university which can accommodate and can be useful for all these people. If you use Nguni also, the same thing is true. You know, all the people from the Chingoni in South Tanzania, the Nsenga in Zambia and Malawi, Tumbuka in Malawi, Siswati speaking peoples, and Nguni here in Ndebele in Matabeleland, in Ndebele here, Zulu, Xhosa. It's more sensible. It is more sensible with two languages spoken very well in any of these clusters. You can reach the whole of Southern Africa. We did some work on the Khoi and the San languages. In fact, my institute produced the first Khoi linguist with a PhD from undergraduates to PhD level. He's now a professor in Namibia. Now, we were pleasantly surprised. We did the work, Khoikhoi go up here, also in Namibia, the groups in Botswana, a small group in Zimbabwe, Angola, and Namibia, we found that it was possible to use one set of rules of spelling to hold them. I never expected it to be like that. But we did the last bit of work in Angola. The Angolan government supported it. Yeah. So this work has been done for about 80% of Africa already in the 25 years that we worked on it. All the way into East Africa, including Somali and all the ones in the Cushitic languages. So it is possible for us, if we are determined. My message this year for the Africa Day celebrations, I gave another talk in the University of Mpumalanga a couple of days ago. It's the same. Please let us start seriously doing something with our languages. Let's empower ourselves with our languages. And that way, we will break through in no time. In no time. If we start seriously, within 10 to 15 years, we will break through. I'm sorry for being a bit sententious, but that's my contribution.
Tatomkhulu. Prof, uyagadla. How do you say that in big English? I mean, there's a lot of educated people here. How do you say that in big English? I'm trying to sound super educated. Oh, hit hard. Hayi ayizwakali ngesingisi man lento. Ayizwakali. Mawuthi uyagadla uyayizwa lento. Inesiqa ngithi. Inesiqi lento. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm listening and I'm thinking, does one get a chance to apply to be related to somebody who speaks like this? We shall see if there are any application forms, Baba, so that I could also apply to be related, so that some of the cleverity that you have, I can also inherit. There are times, since we live in such fast-forward times, when you realize in the morning, when you open your eyes, that the light is out, the sun has risen, and you have got to get out of bed, and sometimes I find that it's unwake-upable. I don't know if it happens to you. Does it happen to you? That is unwake-upable. You've got to say something to yourself. You've got to find something. Other people believe in coffee. Other people believe in all kinds of things. And for me, I have to repeat something when it's unwake-upable. Before I can even get out of bed, before I can get to the shower, before I can have my tea to help me face the day, I repeat to myself, singekaliboni ikusasa eliqhakazile emehlweni eingane zethu okuningi esikwenza manje kuyizeleze. I repeat. Singakaboni ikusasa eliqhakazile emehlweni eingane zethu okuningi esikwenza namuhla kuyizeleze. I will come into big English now ukubona ukuthi phela nami ngingafunda kancane. Until we see a brighter future in our children's eyes, not much of what we do today has any value. I repeat as I get into the shower, until we see a brighter future in our children's eyes, not much of what we do today has any value. Then I can get up and face the day. It's important to have a mantra as a human being. And right now, our keynote speaker says, until we honor our languages, the freedom that we shout from the hilltops about has got no value. Until we harness our languages, our sense of self. I'm so grateful that I was here tonight to hear you, sir. I'm so grateful to hear you. I'm going to call upon our Director General, Mr. Vusumuzi Mkhize Kabazela. Kade ngagcina ukuza ukhuluma. Long time since I last heard you. Our Honorable Minister, Obabu Unatim Tetwa, could not be with us, but the DG is here with us. We are ready to hear you, sir. Please put your hands together and welcome our DG, Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. Siyabonga.
Thank you. When abantu abakhuluma sebekhulume kangaka angisazi khona nefanele ngisho noma sefanele ngihlale ngithule babukwesi professor bona babu professor Siepela, we come a long way in some of the geographic areas and geographical locations in pursuit of an academic excellence in a particular university that was trying very hard to make sure that Africans don't have to depend on traditional universities in order for them to feel empowered. And I'm so happy to see you, Professor Siepe, again here. Maybe before I deliver the message from my minister, and I think it has been well stated the reasons that I am here to represent him. It will be ideal for me, Program Director Mamqina Mhlope, our Vice Chancellor, Professor Xoliso Mtose, Deputy Vice Chancellors, Deans, as well as executives from the University of Zululand, as a university that has got a very rich history and a very, very powerful work that it has done in producing some of the intellectuals we didn't think will come out of a university branded as Black University. Chief executives of entities here present, members of the media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, maybe for starters, as I greet you this evening, Professor Kwesi Pra, I must start by again passing our apology for the minister's inability to join you this evening. It was circumstances beyond his control, hence he had to then delegate that I am here. When Amapogopogo won the World Cup for the first time, people said that one of the reasons is that they were speaking Afrikaans, and the Western countries could not understand them, so they could beat them just using the power of language, word movements they were communicating to do. In the recent, again, triumphant return from Japan when they won a World Cup again as Mapogopogo, they said that Abo Mampimpi, they had brought a dimension of language that also their opponents could not understand. So what it is that is in language and the power of language, and why the colonizers were so afraid of culture and language of indigenous people. I think the answer lies more in what Ngugi wa Thiong'o once said. When he said while he was in prison, he was surprised why he's being imprisoned for working in an African language. But when he was working in an English language, he was not imprisoned. He then realized at that time while in prison, the power between the language and the use of power itself and the meaning of power. So we really appreciate, Professor, what you have said. But in your statement, you touched a raw nerve about geography and people. And in this message of the minister, I think there is an answer there about the unity of Africans. When the father of African unity, first president of Democratic President of Ghana said, I am not African because I was born in Africa. I am African because Africa was born in me. A close quote. In other words, your connectedness to your own continent and your geographic space is crucial. Because in one way or the other, the cultures that you learn and the heritage that get bestowed on you is mainly based on the environment where you were born. And maybe that's why we call ourselves Africans. Because there is power in connecting yourself to who you are. So I would like to then start with the message very briefly and say that I extend my warmest greetings to all of you present here. I'm glad that we can still gather here under the conditions that are extremely difficult in our country and the world, and that is the problem of COVID-19 pandemic. So we meet under quite different circumstances. This has been an important week for us as we celebrate the historic founding of the Organization of African Unity in 1963 and recognize the leadership role of the illustrious leaders and founders who demonstrated to Africans throughout the globe and to the world at large that Africa is the first continent to seek unity. Indeed, we are able to understand who we are as we seek to create a better Africa and a better world, armed with the insights of those who have come before us. Even now, their vision inspires us and guides us as we need to encourage true unity in the face of an all-consuming pandemic and the economic realities that such an occurrence has enforced upon us. I think it's crucial to understand that unity is a source of survival, but also it shapes our thinking about our destiny as a nation. One of the key powerful tools that the colonizers used was to divide Africans and superimpose ideology of a better Africa and African than the other. And this, you cannot look at it from very far to bring it home when slavery took its root in Africa. You'll understand that those who were the hewers of wood there, who were the cotton farm workers, were supervised by the so-called house slave. But it was an African slave enslaving another one, worse than the master himself or herself. It was a divide and rule to ensure that Africans can unite, because the power of unity would have brought them to realize the need to fight a common enemy and to liberate themselves even quicker. So it is important that the vision of our founding fathers of African unity is understood in that context, and that we must pursue it even today and stay away from xenophobia or Afrophobia, which becomes another shackle on our legs to move forward, because those who are colonizers and were colonizers before, and they still believe in superiority of a race rather than humanity, they decide to use that divide and rule. So African fathers, founding fathers of our unity, made these contributions as stepping stones in the service of a greater humanity and have laid the foundations for our freedom and demand of us that we too have a humanizing vocation. From their example, we need to seek inspiration and provide hope in the present and bring this accumulation of knowledge and history to bear upon us as we fight the scourge and seek to save the people of our country, our continent, and the world. It is also an important year for us as South Africans. This is an 60th anniversary of Baba Nkosi Albert Luthuli, who was the first to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize as an African. To quote in 1961 on his speech on the 10th of December, I quote, "It is an honor for the peace-loving people of the entire world and an encouragement for us all to redouble our efforts in this struggle for peace and friendship." Indeed, as we do need in this world of ours at the present moment, peace and friendship. These are becoming very rare commodities in the world. For my part, I am deeply conscious of the added responsibility which this award entails. I have the feeling that I have been made answerable to for the future of the people of South Africa, for if there is no peace for the majority of them, there is no peace for anyone, close quote. It is mainly, I believe, African leadership that can speak so profoundly and with such certainty of their roles in relation to, but not only the present, but to the future. The need to future-proof ourselves even today as we find ourselves in the midst of a pandemic and in a situation where, although we have made strides, much must still be done. It is important. Indeed, this year also marks the 150th anniversary of the birth of one of South Africa's most remarkable and pioneering leaders, Mama Charlotte Manyamaxeke. We recognize and pay tribute to the first black South African woman to obtain a science degree. She was a delegate to the African National Congress's founding conference in 1912 and was a founder of the Bantu Women's League, a forerunner of the today's ANC Women's League. She challenged the status quo. She challenged patriarchy. She challenged customs that were negative and that were destructive in subjugating women. We must remember during those times of colonialism, before South Africa suffered what we call colonialism of a special kind, apartheid, that African women in particular were suffering a double jeopardy from their own customs and cultures, as well as from the colonialists' exploitation and subjugation. So Mama Maxeke made an exceptional contribution to the struggle for the liberation of women in South Africa and challenged contemporary attitudes about the place of women in politics, society, and the economy. She was part of a generation who truly discovered their mission, and she did so alongside other intellectuals of her ilk. We further welcome the African Union theme for 2021-2022 as the year for arts, culture, and heritage. Levers for building the Africa we want. This adoption by African Union is again a greatest symbol of realizing that culture, heritage, is a powerful tool for development. Our year-long program of activities in supportive of this rallying call and the importance of the cultural creative industries is the attainment of Agenda 2063 objectives. Particularly, there are clear aspirations that relate to culture. Such is our times that it requires of us to be inventive, to look at reality with new eyes, and to be re-energized, to lead in this new chapter for the world and for our country. Collectively, the past with its heroic battles and our efforts to transform our society in the present have set out for us on this path things that must bring into the world a new person. If I quote what Paulo Freire had said, opening quote, this new being, no longer oppressor, no longer oppressed, but human in the process of achieving freedom, close quote. As Professor Kwesi Pra shares his thoughts with us today, we would really like to thank him for his gracious acceptance to be here. And in doing this, indeed, he has been able to assist us to remind us about the power of language. Language is a component of culture, of heritage. If I can just deviate from the speech of the minister and just say that Minister Nadim Mthethwa, and just say that, just think about it, those who grew during my time at primary school, where we didn't have grades then, but you know how the colonizer used to shape our minds about our identity. Even in school, I remember very well that I found myself in a situation where I would be reported for speaking my language. There would be a prefect who will write you down and say to you, you have spoken your language. They give their names to the teacher and you get punished because we thought you are imbuing a sense of ability to be intellectually clever than others if you speak English. But we were suppressing, becoming our own oppressors, destroying the sense of pride from ourselves, being children, taught to be spies among ourselves for speaking our own language. When you read the book by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, one of the things that he raises, the great African writer, is that same thing was happening in Kenya. A teacher will give you a particular ticket. As soon as you speak your language, they give you that ticket. The other learner hears the other one speaks his language or her language, they give that ticket. When it is time to get out of school, they say, where is the ticket? Then the last person who got that ticket must say, where did I get it? Then the whole chain, the other child says, I got it from you, that from you. Then all those children are now being staged at the assembly, having broken their rules. Why? Punished for speaking their language. Why would a colonizer be so afraid of a language? There is power in the language because it's about your identity. It makes sure that you understand the world better, your perspective of life is shaped by what is the content of language. So I agree with you, Professor, that we must do more to empower the use of our languages. And as a Director General responsible for pioneering that policy, I think you have challenged me even more to go back and see that the Promotion of African or Previously Disadvantaged Languages Act that was published in 2012 is not being used. Our people go to our offices, they are forced to speak English. It doesn't matter whether the office of government is in rural area or not. So we are inflicting pain by discarding our own culture, our own heritage, our own language. The founders of African Unity, that's not what they wanted. So we are happy that African Union has adopted Professor Kwesi Pra, the issue of the Swahili as a foundation to start allowing Africans to communicate among themselves. Every country must start teaching that language so that we can relate to one another. We are in the United Nations, our leaders speak English. But when Putin speaks, he speaks Russian. When Xi speaks, the Chinese leader speaks Chinese. Nobody laughs. But Africans laugh among themselves. Hey, did you hear him? He can't even finish a good grammatical sentence. So liberation of the mind is required for us to be able to be truly Africans, proud of our own identity. Namanje nje ngikhuluma isingisi ngaze ngaqeda. Inkinga le. Ngoba nje ngilana ngiphakathi impela phakathi kwaZulu. Kodwa ngikhuluma isilungu ngize ngiqede ngoba ngiyazi khona abalalela abangasazi isiZulu. So when we talk about the power of language, uyabona nje ukuthi sisalimele kakhulu. Asikwazi nokukhuluma sisodwa nje sisonke sibaningi kangaka. All we are thinking about is, hey, Lisa is gonna feel excluded, you know? It's a problem. We must change the mindset. Abantwana bethu bafeel ukuthi ngum-African and it's not a mistake. Bazokwenza kanjani lokho? Bazokwenza ukuthi ubone le brighter future esho umama ugcina enhloko ukuthi uma njalo nje sezohamba yogeza ekseni uyayicabanga le ndaba athi hey madoda uma ngakaboni ikusasa eli bright elihle emehlweni omntwana wami then konke ngikwenza absolute. So all I'm saying is that for this lecture of today by Professor Kwesi, we really had wonderful deliberations on the question of language, social and economic development, as well as decolonization. So in conclusion, as Minister concludes, as I speak on behalf of Minister Mthethwa, I must say, I am reminded of the ways of Ngugi wa Thiong'o in an essay in his book, Homecoming, where he says that, open quote, political and economic liberation are the essential condition for cultural liberation, for the true release of a people's creative spirit and imagination. It is when people are involved in the active work of destroying an inhibitive social structure and building a new one that they begin to see themselves. They are born again. Close quote. Thank you very much.
Ngabe nibhekile njalo uzothola ipromotion ngoba uyayicleana le podium. Niyayibona le nto le. Ngicela abantu bambhekisise uzothola ipromotion umona phansi anguthanda uJeras. Anguthanda uJeras mina. Siyabonga. Ngiyabonga kakhulu, sibonge kakhulu DG. Khabazela bengilindile mina ukuthi uzovela uyithaphune nje. Uzena zamkhiza ngazi nokuthi kube neforget ekhona yini eyenzakele. So kuthandazela Nkosi yami ngubani owaziyo next time ngikubona izobuya ngojabula kakhulu. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call now Baba Siyape. Hayi angikaqedi ngisazokugosipha ngawe. One of the most amazing things I admire about Prof. Sipho Siepe is his valuing of history. Ngoba umlando into enzima, isilo esimakhanda khanda ongekuqeda ukwabala, umlando into enzima. Isilo esimibalabala ongekuqale uqala ukuyibala. Ngicabanga ukuthi umlando into enzima. Ethi uma ngaba uyibhekisisa ikubuke njo emehlweni. Lithi kulungile uyiqhenye ngami. Ungithinta ungiphulule uma uthanda. Umlando into enzima. Uzwa izigubhu zishanga phakathi zithi gu zithi gu zithi gu zithi gu zithi gu zithi gu. Uma uzibheka lezo igubhu ungayiboni ubona sekumamatheka ngisho izinzwane zakho zithi ngumAfrika noma sekwenze njani. Uthi usathokozela usayiqhenya umlando uthi mana khona lapho akubona bodwa ubuhle obusemlandweni waso noma isiphi na isizwe. Cabanga ucabangisise ukuthi uphuma phi na. Ngiyazi inhliziyo iyanqaba nezinyembezi zayo ezehlayo zigobhogobhoze ngoba ayifuni ukukhumbula lapho izehlakalo ezashiya okhokho nokhokho se benkemile ukuthi siphinde sibuyele kuzona. Umlando into enzima. I respect you, sir. I know how you celebrate history. Prof. Siepe, yebo, from the University of Zululand. Ngiyajabula. Good to introduce you, sir.
Thank you very much, Tina, for always being so inspiring. More than 30 years later, you're still as robustly inspiring as you've always been. I also want to say, DG, in the court of law, after your coat of homecoming, so that nothing is spoiled, they would simply say, we concur, and then you sit down. But if I had suggested anything like that, my Vice Chancellor would say, but I thought you were going to say a vote of thanks. So let me try to do exactly that. But I would like to start by reflecting on the significance of today, because 2 days ago, I participated in the discussion on a webinar on the same topic, but the organizers were based in New York. And they had invited Africans from almost every part of the world. But what it showed is that we are engaged in a planetary movement. And this day, on its own, begins to create a global community. And it is very significant in that sense that there is this global awakening that wherever Africans find themselves. You know, for those who have followed the history of the ANC, what you'll discover is the idea of the General 8 statement. And when you go back to that history, you find that General 8 statement was about connecting members of the ANC wherever they were. Simply to say, we understand that you're dispersed, but we need to find each other. And there must be a line of march that gets pushed out every year. So the Africa Day serves the same purpose, to connect Africans wherever they are, and to send a message that a luta continua. I would be remiss if I do not thank the minister for agreeing graciously to partner with the University of Zululand in the delivery of the Africa Month lecture. And I'm very pleased that when you read what is contained in the letter of the minister about the importance of this, our guest speaker, Professor Pra, tried to link that with the articulation that comes from both the history of the Africa Day, its objectives, which I'll briefly state, just for the sake of those who have not read what emerges from the ministry and the department, that the 4 things that we must bear in mind when we think about Africa Day. 1 is to promote cultural understanding among African people. That links also to the point that Professor Pra raised. The second one is about promotion of the Pan-African identity. And third one, as Professor Pra says, it's about fostering unity among Africans. And Professor Masoga kept on reminding us, as the VC also did, that in this we would then succeed in fostering socio-economic integration of the continent. But Professor Pra was quick to remind us that we have a history of master-slave relationship. And those who still locate themselves within the slave-master relationship, you see them in the language that they speak and the language that they promote. That the countries where the language of the oppressor is an official language are those that have a colonial experience. And the Professor Pra was bold to say something that we must underline, that when we talked about political freedom, Professor Pra puts it as simply the beginning of a neo-colonial arrangement. And when you see that so-called breakthrough in that sense, then you understand that, as the VC says, in quoting Nelson Mandela, that there are many more hills to climb. DG, if ever we forget anything today, one thing we must not forget is the line that Professor Pra put, that culture is the real battleground. And language lies at the heart of culture. Language is central, is a central pillar on which the whole cultural edifice rests. And we're lucky to have had experience in this country of a people who moved from the margins towards dominance by developing their own language. Professor Pra was very polite in not telling us that we had failed dismally. But he felt that maybe he should use an example so that we can look at ourselves in the mirror and be embarrassed sufficiently. When he pointed out that Afrikaners, it took them only 20 years to build a language, and that language became a language of science, the language of technology, the language of commerce, a language of transaction. That if you're not going to value your language, you are actually in a game of excluding the majority of Africans. But Professor Pra was also sharp in pointing out that there's nothing special about our own colonialism, that there have been other countries, other people who had been colonized. But those people, in reclaiming themselves, understood that culture must be at the center. So we are pleased, DG, that at University of Zululand, we are beginning to take cognizance and also recognize the challenge that we face. And this very year, with the leadership of the VC, we are beginning to redefine ourselves as a distinctly African university. And that is an unapologetic posture that we are taking. And we are also saying, to make sure that we walk the talk, we will make sure that language development becomes central. Professor Masoga also pointed out something, VC, in our engagement last week, when he said we must redefine what is the business of University of Zululand. And DG, you'll be pleased to know that he says, African thought will be the business of the University of Zululand. And we also understand something that there's also a price to pay, especially when you are part of the colonial or neo-colonial arrangement. And that penalty comes in a form that any leader, you'll discover that, any leader who is unapologetically African is the most attacked leader. Africans have been told that if you love your people dearly, you are a problem. So most of us, even where we live, we want to be as far away from our people as possible. And if we think we are going to get anywhere, we have made a big mistake. But what I also liked, as Professor Pra has these tendencies of provocation. And one of the provocation was around the need for the de-racialization of our discourse by locating our Africanness, not so much our blackness, and culture as critical. Because as he pointed out, that wherever you find people who call themselves Jews, their skin color ranges from blonde to dark. But what unites them is the culture. And we need to come to that understanding. Yes, the majority of African people will be of a darker skin, but what unites them is the culture. So, and when we talk about culture, again, it's another one of those provocation by Professor Pra, that it must not be only confined to dances. And I've said that we should get to a level where every day must be Africa Day. But the reason why we still have Africa Day is because we recognize and we remind ourselves that we still have work to do. So I would like to say we take the presentations today, DG and Professor Pra, as a very important assignment. An assignment that when we meet again, we would have said, we should be able to say, this as far as we have actually gone. So I'm very pleased that at least I would have wanted the minister to have been here, but as he indicated that, and as we often know, that there are usually challenges and urgent matters that they have to deal with. But the mere fact that he has decided to put resources to something like this, and to make sure that every day for this month, there is a discussion around the unfinished business. And as I said in closing, the real battleground is in the cultural space. And language is very central to that battle. As you also indicated, the whole notion of the power of language. And if we fail, then we will have failed. And I liked your closer when you closed it by saying, every generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it or betray it. Our mission has been imposed on us. There'll be no economic liberation until there is a cultural liberation. Culture and language will give us the confidence to be able to face the future. Vice Chancellor, I hope I have done justice instead of only saying I concur, which is what I would have preferred.
Zulu, sithini? Elethu. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We've come to the end of our program. I'm really grateful to have been here. I'm grateful that my ears were able to hear. I'm grateful that my heart was able to receive all the wisdom that was shared here tonight. I hope every single one of you are feeling almost as happy as I am. Dinner will be served at the boardroom, I'm told, for the dignitaries, and everybody else. There will be, the rest of our guests, there will be dinner also downstairs. Am I right? Hey, English as well. Education. Thank you so much. I hope that you continue to feel that you belong in this beautiful African continent, and make sure that you make a difference. We're not here to eat and sleep. We're here to make a difference. Vumani bo!